Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Health Wealth Podcast. We have another great episode coming up for you. This week, we speak to James Leman, also known online as the Carnivorist, and he shares his health story with us. He had years of a tumultuous health journey, real struggles. He spent 6 years on a vegan diet before his health completely deteriorated. And we talked to him about how he was able to overcome that and get his health back due to his dietary and lifestyle changes. We talk about what those were, about the shortcomings of a vegan diet and what led to his health issues in the first place. And we talk about the importance of listening to your body and also doing your own research and questioning the science. It's going to be a very educational episode for a lot of people. So let's jump right in. So, hello, James. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for giving us your time today. Do you want to just give us a little bit of a background on yourself, and then we can jump into your story and where you started from?
Sure. Thanks for having me on, Ryan. It's an honor to be on the Health Wealth Podcast. I've been following you for some time now. And just for your listeners, we linked up on X, previously known as Twitter, when I first made my foray into the environment over on Twitter, which is a little bit different, as you know, as a platform from Instagram, the other, I'll say, softer social media sites. Twitter and or X, as it's now called, everyone just lets you know what they think pretty easily, which is a good thing. I think it's a great place. But again, thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm born and raised in the lovely island of Bermuda, as we were just talking about offline, and I'm coming to you today from there. I am now, believe it or not, 51 years old, born and raised. I spent a lot of my formative years in school in Canada because my dad's Canadian, and we'll get into that a little bit on my story. But I wanted to share today with your listeners my journey from vegetarian slash pescatarianism into veganism for 6 years. I got very, very sick during those final years of veganism and then switched into a carnivore diet. And now a more, I would say, mostly I do add some fruits in my diet. I have had, but we'll get into that as I detail my journey. But yeah, that's my synopsis, and I'm looking forward to sharing it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I have to say, I didn't know your age beforehand, but you're looking great for 51. So what you're doing must be working quite well.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I really, since I got very, very sick, and the listeners will hear, and I make it a point just to really hone in on what happened to me because my whole reason for starting my podcast, and I'll share where you can find me at the end, was I didn't want others to go through the journey that I had to unnecessarily. And if there's someone out there that their diet is not serving them well, please don't be afraid to pivot because I was very, very dogmatic and sticking to it as so many vegans do, as you know, and my health was suffering because of it. So yeah, let's and thank you. Yeah, I take it very seriously now. I just came back from a weighted walk. That's a big thing that I do, and I'll detail that later as well. So yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Right. So, I mean, it's your story. You'd know the best place to start. Just bring us back to kind of where your health story began, and let's run through it and see what you've discovered along the way and what happened.
Sure. So let's just jump right into it. The best place, as I always say, to start is the beginning. And as I mentioned, was born and raised here in Bermuda, and I am a child of the 70s and 80s. So if you think about the backdrop that was that time, Ryan, that was the changing of the U.S. dietary guidelines. And as we often say here in Bermuda, when the U.S. Sneezes, Bermuda catches a cold. And I can remember growing up and going to my grandmother's who lived in Bermuda as well, for things like Sunday brunch and spending evenings with her. And she was born in the early 1900s, so she used things like tallow, lard, and butter and things like that to cook. And when I was younger, yes, we had those things in the house, and then I started to notice there was the things creeping into the household like seed oils, and I can't believe it's not butter, and Pop Tarts in the morning, and cereals like Lucky Charms, Frosted Flakes, Count Chocula. You come on, all you 80s kids, you remember those sugar bombs that we all had in the morning just to start our day off on the sugar high and get wired. But a little interesting factoid is that my mom was a vegetarian from the time I was born and continues to be. And so I had that as well. Now my dad always has eaten meat in some capacity, and he would often grill us up burgers. So I was very much had an omnivorous diet when I was a younger kid. However, because of as I mentioned, those things creeping into our dinner and lunch and breakfast schedule, I began to put on weight when I was a young boy. I was actually quite chunky as a little kid. That kind of changed when I got sent off to boarding school when I was 15 at the time. 15, got sent away to Canada. My dad's Canadian, and so as you know, when you go to boarding school, you're kind of forced to eat what they serve you in the dining hall. And the good thing was we had a Hungarian chef at the time, so there was a lot of meats and stews because cold weather in Canada. So I remember things like Hungarian goulash and lots of stews to keep you warm. And I got into fitness because fitness was a requirement during the university years. So I did things like crew rowing, played basketball, varsity basketball, and stuff like that. So I actually got quite fit. And in those years, I met a young lady and we dated for quite some time, I think, which at that age is quite something. I think like 5, 6 years. And she happened to be vegetarian at the time. Now, I didn't make the switch early on. We went to university together and lived together, but because of necessity and expense, I started eating what she was eating at the time. It just made sense and it was easier. And of course, living with someone that's a vegetarian, you often ask questions and say, okay, well, why are you doing this? Why are you choosing not to eat meat? And I guess those seeds were planted in me. Now, I didn't make any major switches until I got back from my university career to Bermuda, and I entered into the working world. But I kind of kept up that vegetarian style of eating. I had some eggs there, but because I was in Bermuda, and as you can imagine, we're surrounded by water out here in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and just an abundance of fresh fish. So for many, many years, I was vegetarian and then slash pescatarian off and on. And because I was working and didn't have a lot of time for exercise, I started to put weight back on. And of course, with the stress of the insurance world that I was in for many, many years, over a decade, 15 years almost, there was a lot of stress. So I did drink quite a bit too. So my health was not the best. Anyhow, long story short, I should have noticed some things changing there. I obviously noticed my weight being put on quite quickly and being out of shape. But I started to have some episodes of passing out, not feeling so well, and yeah, my health was not tip top. Fast forward to about 2000 and I would say 14, and at the time, uh, I was really looking at trying to get back in shape. And you have to remember around 2014, that backdrop of the vegan movement really getting a big push. And a lot of those, I like to call them propaganda pieces, were put out. Things like, if you recall or have done any investigations into it, Cowspiracy, Forks Over Knives. And then Game Changers came out. And I was like, right, look at these guys. They look great and all they eat is plants. And this must be the way to go, and made the switch right then and there to veganism. I really started going quite deep into all the sort of three main pillars of the stool that props that up. If you listen to Jane Buxton talk about it in her book, The Great Plant-Based Con, but you think about the environmental angle, your health angle, and then of course for the animals suffering. So I looked quite deeply into everything and thought that's what I'm going to do, and proceeded to ditch everything out of the fridge and replace with all plant-based goods, and got into some juicing and got into whole foods plant-based diet. And I'll tell you, Ryan, for the first couple of years, actually, I felt pretty good. The weight came off as naturally it tends to do when you eliminate a lot of the junk food. And I got back into exercise and fitness and felt pretty good. And that continued for the first few years. And again, hindsight being 2020, as they say, I should have noticed again certain things creeping in. But you have to understand that when you're coming from being sort of overweight and getting into fitness, and you're going to your GP who happens to be in support of this way of eating, and so you're doing all the right things, your blood work's immaculate, but I was going, yeah, but I'm still not feeling the best. And then you're in communities that are like echo chambers. You're hearing that, don't worry, it's all going to be good. Even if you're feeling nice or great, yeah, and you're not, or sorry, excuse me, not feeling well, you just have to vegan harder. You got to double down. And so when those instances came along, I did just that. And I'll pause there because I'm sure you have a couple of questions for me.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I think you raised a good point that I think it's very convincing that the story, the whole vegan argument, isn't it? It is convincing. they give it the whole, say with the moral compass, the environmental, the health, and obviously at first, like you said, you got good results, which is expected because you took out all the junk and you did it, but it's just over time where it starts to creep in, isn't it? So I think it's very easy to see how people do get convinced by it. Was it, did you, I know you said before you had a girlfriend who was vegetarian. When you went to sort of full vegan, was there anyone around you also influencing that, or was it mainly what you saw?
Oh no, absolutely. I mean, my partner and I at the time, and wife at the time, we really did this together, and she actually became a plant-based, fully certified chef through at the time the Matthew Kenny Culinary Institute in the U.S. and started her own business based around whole foods, plant-based meal preparation, and then later on gotten into gluten-free vegan sweets, specifically cupcakes. So we were right into it. So the whole house was cleaned out and just full of plant foods, and yeah, it was really interesting. And she had been raised, she was originally from Venezuela, so a lot of meat.
Mm.
But we watched these films together and both thought, yeah, that's it. This is the way to go forward. And went, as I said, full bore into the whole vegan movement. And you said it was very convincing. And those pieces, those films, it's hard not to be when you watch them. They're very well put together, even if the science is flawed, even if later on you find that the logic is flawed, it is very compelling. And I understand why so many people that I've talked to on my own podcast have said the same thing, that those sort of pieces are centerpieces around why they first got into it too. Things like, and also the PETA movement, they got handed out flyers at various events, but absolutely, man.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's again, it's another point I want to make on your story is that like you said, you got the feedback of you need to vegan harder. A lot of people say, oh, well, you had issues on the vegan diet. You probably didn't do it properly. But I mean, you guys were fully in it. You said she got qualified as a chef. You were doing whole food vegan. You did it properly. And then obviously, as you're going to tell us, that there were still issues that came up. So, I want to make that clear to people. You weren't eating a rubbish diet, calling it vegan. You were eating as pure as possible. You were fully in it, and yet you ran into health issues.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, I often get people, as I'm sure you've seen, especially on X, that really are combative, that are waist deep in it right now, or even higher, neck deep, I should say, in what they're
Mm.
doing. And I completely empathize with those folks because I was there. I often tell people I was never one of the preachy vegans or going around attacking people, but I certainly let people know what I was doing. I still get people stop me to this day here in Bermuda that go, "How's that vegan diet going for you, man?" I'm like, Not vegan anymore." Almost completely opposite. And they're like, "Huh?" And I'm like, "Yeah." But I do empathize with those folks because, they're all thinking this is the right way to go. And it's, it's a challenging space to be in. And as I said to you offline, the whole reason I started my podcast is just so people don't have to go down that road that I did. And yeah, it can be very confusing, a very confusing space, and it's difficult to navigate your way through. But yeah, the unfortunately for me, my health started to suffer, and we can get into that in a second. But again, it was very clean eating, whole foods, plant-based, as I said. And often the vegans would say, well, you weren't supplementing correctly. You weren't doing B12. Nope, I did that too. I got all the vegan B12 supplements. No, you weren't adding this into your diet. You're missing. No, we really ate the colors of the vegan rainbow. We were doing it really between baked, sometimes raw. We did juicing, all the things, and still didn't work out for me. And that is the case for many people.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said with your podcast, you don't want people to make those same mistakes. And that is key because the reason that we have to work so hard to get this message out there is because the vegan propaganda is so big, isn't it? It's the thing that's being pushed. And so a lot of people fall for it. I mean, even the standard diet is mostly plant-based and as well as the vegan movement on top, and it's being pushed by everything in terms of environmental and climate reasons and health reasons and moral reasons, and it's really being pushed. And so, like we said, it's very convincing. A lot of people do fall for it, and so it's important to raise awareness of the fact that there are issues. Like, yes, you know what, going from a standard diet to a vegan diet, you probably will improve your health at first, but there are these longer term issues which come up, and people need to be aware of that rather than just veganing harder, as you said. So, you know, tell us then, come into some detail about, what were the things you started to see, the health issues that you started to have?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, my weight loss was great because I needed to lose a few pounds. But then it became very problematic because I couldn't stop no matter how much I was eating, the weight loss just kept going. I became very emaciated looking. People will tell you, and from if you go to my Instagram profiles and pics I've shared on X, you can see it at what stages that happened. And then I was having episodes of memory loss. Like I honestly thought, Ryan, that I was getting early onset dementia or Alzheimer's because I would be at my job typing away on the keyboard and then literally forget where the heck I was and what I was doing. I'm like, where am I? What am I doing here? Things like I would get these unrelenting headaches, and my skin started to crack. My nails were splitting. Hair was falling out on the top of my head, all over my body. My hair was falling out. Certainly, my testosterone was much, much lower. My libido had left me. And all those things should have just started to ring warning bells for me, and they didn't. And of course, I went to Dr. Google and some communities online that I had been in and said, "Look, have you guys explained this? Oh, well, you need to juice. You need to go raw vegan for a few weeks down, as I mentioned earlier." And I thought, yeah, that's got to be it. Because again, going back to my doctor, I was saying, I'm kind of light now. I don't seem to have much muscle mass for a then 40, late 40-year-old male. And, I mentioned to her, it was her at the time, that I was struggling with my libido and things like that. Oh, well, you're doing all the right things. You just need to make sure you're supplementing again correctly and doing these things. And it just unfortunately continued to get worse. And before I pause again, I will say that I ended up finding this female physician online who had cured her lupus with apparently this juicing remedy. And I thought, okay, this is going to be good because at the time they were testing me for all sorts of autoimmune issues as well. And between my gaunt look and just feeling so fatigued all day long, and plus the issues I had mentioned, I thought this will certainly help me because apparently it cures all kinds of things, including lupus. And I embarked on this journey where I was eating uh, sort of 3 meals a day of this concoction in a blender that was chia seeds, a cup of chia seeds, various types of fruit, a bag of kale and spinach mixed together, and blend this thing up, and down the hatch it went. And man, it made me feel awful, awful. And you have to understand, Ryan, at this time, let me paint the backdrop. It was early 2020 when I started to feel my worst. At my worst, I basically became almost bedbound. I was laid off from my job, but both because of the pandemic, but also in an honest moment because I stopped being able to do the functions of my daily duties at the job. I was so fatigued, constantly calling in sick, and I just said, I can't do this. I got put on disability for a little while, which I've never in my life had to do before. And then the pandemic hit. Obviously, we were on a small island here. The local hospital shut down, and I was really, really scared, man, because at that point I had started bleeding from my bowels profusely. I was suffering from severe constipation, fatigue. I got down to 128 pounds at my lightest, and for the listeners, I'm 6'2", and I had been 200 plus at my heaviest. So for people that saw me, they just were in shock. And I was in shock when I looked in the mirror, quite honestly. I ended up having to buy kids' underwears because my waist size was so small. And yeah, I was continuing on with reckless abandon with this juicing and just making myself sicker and sicker, thinking this was going to be the key to my salvation, but it certainly wasn't. And I'll pause there again for you.
Yeah, I mean that's it, again, it's just highlighting kind of that danger of it, that when people get into this and they're, that they're fooled by the propaganda and they're kind of brainwashed into it, and they, all of these things are going wrong, but yet in your mind you're still thinking the answer's still veganism. I'm just doing something wrong. It's this and that. Whereas there's all these warning signs are going off in your body, and people are just ignoring them because they're so convinced by it. So it just, people need to question if that's happening to your health. Clearly, you're doing something wrong, and people need to, they need to feel, I'm not even sure the word, because I know when you're in, like, say, a vegan community, and if you dare to question it, I think you get quite a lot of people jump down your throat. So people need to feel that they're completely in their rights to question things and say, hold on a minute, why is this happening to me? And try and kind of look into it a bit deeper. I mean, I imagine, did you get some pushback if you did question anything? Did you get people either attacking you or telling you just vegan harder?
Um, No, because I have to be honest, at the time, Ryan, I was still very much entrenched in the idea that I was on the right path, but I just
Mm.
hadn't been doing it right. And I needed to make these tweaks that would, as I say, lead to my better outcomes. But looking back on it now, obviously, I just compounded these things over time, and the nutritional deficiencies just crept up. So, as we know, and listening to Dr. Chaffee, who we talked about too, is that you know, these things are a combination of toxicities and malnutrition. And unfortunately, that runs rife within this style of eating because the deficiencies, we can talk about all the essential amino acids and things that you're lacking on the diet, but obviously the good old animal fats for building hormones as a blocks of hormones too, but and then toxicities. And we're just about to get into how I eventually said enough is enough and began searching online. But yeah, I didn't receive really any of that pushback because I was still just tinkering around with initially on how to figure out my way out of it. So I hadn't really questioned it, more so, please someone help me. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, you talk about the deficiency. I mean, especially when you were talking about, you were struggling to even think properly and to function. And I'm imagining, it's coming to my head immediately, is that you're probably in a low fat diet, and missing those essential fatty acids, isn't it? That's an obvious thing that comes up there.
Oh, Ryan, I can remember often tell this story that the warning bells were going off all around me. I remember that one day for my fats, I used to eat a lot of avocado and also coconut. And I had purchased a jar of coconut manna, which is just a coconut fat in a jar. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's essentially just coconut fat. And one day I could tell my body was so starved for some sort of fat in the diet that I went and just literally started scooping out the coconut manna and eating it, the whole jar. And of course, that led to a whole host of other issues, from eating almost a whole jar of coconut manna. But you're absolutely right. I was fat starved and also, uh, you know, all kinds of other things deficient on. But a lot of that had to do with the toxicities that I was ingesting too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we can get into all of that, I'm sure, as the story goes. So, you know, let's now come to where you kind of reached that rock bottom, and what did you change to help it, and what were the things that happened that got you to there? Because obviously, knowing what you eat now, it's a big change. It's the complete opposite direction. So, what happened to bring you to that decision?
Well, as people often say, Ryan, I was sick and tired of being sick and tired, and I was really fearful. My family was fearful for my health. I was fearful that I wouldn't be around much longer because, as you can imagine, uh, the fear of not being able to probably work again at that time, being pretty much bedbound, full of pain. I mean, I didn't get into some of the other things, but I had severe arthritis. I had was wearing braces on my wrist because they were constantly hurting. I could barely sleep because I was being awoken most of the night because I couldn't find a comfortable position to lay in. My body was just full of pain all the time. I was uh, in tears a lot because I don't think people understood what I was going through internally. I mean, I looked sick enough, but internally I was just racked with pain, depression, anxiety. It, so it was really, really bad. I had never thought of myself as being a depressed and anxious person, but the GP at the time said, I prescribed me antidepressant pills. I never ended up taking them because I was like, I've never been depressed. What is going on? I was in denial, and I really was. Looking back, I really was, and I wasn't a lot of fun to be around in a very honest moment at that time. And so I started Googling again, back to Dr. Google, because again, think of the backdrop of the pandemic. We were in deep into the pandemic's first year at that point. So most things were on lockdown. We were only allowed to walk around our neighborhoods and not go much further except to the grocery store. Remember the good old days. And I started Googling and I just put in something one day. I just said, can plants be harmful for your health? And of course, the initial stuff was all, no, the best way forward, this is the way for the future, very healthy. But there was one, and it was a YouTube link. And again, I often say it's divine intervention because I really feel that way, but it was a online YouTube presentation that is still up there by Sally K. Norton, who I've interviewed, called Lost Seasonality and the Overconsumption of Plants. And I thought, let's just check this out. And I watched it, and I thought to myself, damn, I could have been doing this wrong. And I watched it again, and I watched it again, and I watched it again. And every time I watched it, even in my brain fog state, because that was one of the worst symptoms I had, was brain fog, Ryan. I didn't talk about that, but I literally couldn't think straight. I had ringing in my ears, tinnitus, all that stuff. Even in that brain fog state, it began to make sense to me. And then I did a deep dive at that time into low oxalate eating, which of course led me to the fact that the lowest oxalate foods you can get out there are animal foods. And I thought to myself, okay, James, we really started, I just couldn't bear to be in the body that I had given myself any longer. And I started initially, Ryan, to just lower my oxalate intake. So I stuck with the plants for a while, but I lowered the oxalates for a good couple of months. And I have to tell you, man, even for a few months, I noticed some changes, just lowering the oxalates, because the highest oxalate foods are inherent in the vegan diet and also sadly in the keto space, Ryan. And those things are spinach, one of the highest oxalate foods out there. I was eating bags of the stuff. Chia seeds, you heard me mention, really high in oxalate. Some fruits that are, think of blackberries. I was eating lots of those things. But more importantly, all the nuts and seeds. So all the keto stuff, if we think about it, but on the vegan diet, you substitute with almond flour, almond milk, uh, peanut butter, all the staples that you reach to get protein on the vegan diet are full of oxalates. And some people in your listeners may be going, yeah, James, but there's people that have eaten tons of this and they look great for years. And yes, that is true. And again, let me emphasize this, Ryan. If you feel great with the way that you're eating and want to continue and your blood work and your stuff is checking out, please do you. However, if you feel in any way that your diet is not serving you, even with what you're being told by other people, do not be afraid to pivot, because I am here today to say that I am an example of what is possible if you do just have the intestinal fortitude to go against the grain, what you're being told, and listen to your body. If I had not have done that, I honestly believe, I know, Ryan, I wouldn't be here talking to you today. I'll pause there again.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree completely with what you're saying there. You put it better than I did earlier, but that you have to just put your health first and be willing to question and to change. Your health is more important than a certain dogma. And like you said, that those people, the people that are struggling, are the ones we're trying to reach. As you said, you're feeling great eating how you eat, carry on, no problem. But this is for those people that are struggling, that that don't see a way out and can't see how to change. And people that are in a similar situation to what you were and lots of other guests we've had on. And the fact that you are a living representation that there is a way. You can change things and you can recover your health, and that's the message that we're trying to get to people. So how did you first start eating the animal foods, like, and what how did you feel? What did you get instant benefits from them? What did it change? Run us through that.
Yeah, it's a great story, and I just had shared, which was an absolute honor for me, and one of my big inspirations now. And I wish I told her in person. I wish I had found her work earlier. Is Leaire Keith and her book, The Vegetarian Myth, and we just shared this exact story on a podcast together, side by side. And her first bites of adding some foods back in, and like her, I chose fish because if you think back to what I was telling you, the last sort of animal protein that I had eaten was fish, and it was most known to me here in Bermuda. So it was salmon initially for me. I remember going to purchase it at the grocery store and thinking to myself, here goes, and grilled it up on a little grill I had outside, and slowly took my first bites. And you often hear stories, Ryan, of the vegans and the lights coming back on. And I wouldn't say mine was instantaneous, but certainly a few hours later, I could almost feel my body was going, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And the brain fog just started to lift a little. And that was enough for me to say, you're on the right track. This is the way. Now I need for your listeners to understand something. For many people that are coming from a standard diet or a keto diet into the carnivore space, the transition can be a lot easier. For those folks that are coming from a vegan background, and I did it 6 years, and I can tell you, listeners, I did not cheat once, not once. Hand on my heart, looking up above to whatever you believe in, I did not cheat once. Because the vegan diet is obviously only plants, seeds, nuts, things like that, and leafy green vegetables, and fruits. Your body stops producing certain things that break down meats. So adding in things like beef or things that are a little bit tougher to break down was a very much a challenge for me early on. So I couldn't, even though I wanted to eat them, I couldn't. And I realized, as Lear Keith did, that your stomach acidity lowers and you have to almost retrain your body or supplement, which I still do to this day with betaine HCl, which is a hydrochloric acid supplement, to get that stomach acidity up so you can break down, unbundle these essential amino acids and proteins in the meat and just make the digestive process easier. I also take a lipase, which is a fat digestive enzyme, every day, because that was a struggle for me. I had stomach acidity insufficiency, and I also had the pancreatic insufficiency because of those many years of not eating things like fats and protein or animal protein. So that transition can be a little bit more challenging. So those folks coming from the vegan space just have to be aware of that. The other thing is, as I mentioned earlier, is you have to be aware of how many oxalates you were eating if you were a vegan prior. So here's what happened. I animal products back in, and also at the same time slowly started decreasing the amount of oxalates that I was eating. Thank goodness, again, divine intervention, that I came across Sally Norton, because I can only imagine if I hadn't come across the oxalate piece first. So many of the vegans that go straight into carnivore, I found, and yeah, I was a little bit bullheaded, but at least I knew enough to make the adjustment, really struggle after a few months because the oxalate dumping comes on. And people are going, Ryan asked James, what is oxalate dumping? Here you go. Um, Oxalate dumping. So here's the thing. You heard me mention earlier, listeners, about the high oxalate foods. Oxalate is a very tricky bugger, because if you think of little shards of glass, this is how plants protect themselves and protect their progeny, their seeds. They surround the seeds, especially with these little shards of glass, oxalate crystals. And they go into your body when you ingest them, and they also bind to minerals. So even if you're supplementing with minerals, the chances are they pull the minerals out of your body and out of your tissues and organs, and they settle exactly there, and old injury spots in your body and also in your tissues and organs. So as your oxalate intake goes up, the body stores more and more of these until you start to slow down, and the body goes, oh, hallelujah, he stopped. We're going to start releasing these and getting these out, because they are very much not only a burden to the body in the sense of muscles and tissues, but also at the mitochondria level, because they're really small. And if you go too fast, too quickly, the symptoms can be sometimes worse than when you're ingesting them. Think of developing severe kidney stones, damage. You just feel awful because your body is starting to expel them. Your urine goes cloudy. That's a telltale sign. You start feeling as if you made the wrong choice when you switched over. That's not it. You just need to slow the process. And for me, I went full bore, being the stubborn man I am, into the carnivore diet. And I had this honeymoon period for about 3 months where I was like, oh my God, I feel like I'm 30 again. Yes, this is the way. Then about the halfway through that third month, boom, I start to feel awful again. I'm like, oh no, what's happening here? Message Sally on Instagram, and she goes, hey, what are you doing? You need to slow down. You need to add some oxalate back in. And by adding oxalate back in, it tells the body just to slow down on this dumping or excreting process. And I chose fruits because I swore down I wouldn't eat another vegetable again in my life, because I juiced and roasted it and Lord knows what else, enough of them in my lifetime to last a lifetime. So I chose blueberries and seasonal bananas that grow here in Bermuda, and I still eat them to this day.
Yeah, I think that's a hugely important point that you've made, that that adaptation phase can be different for everyone, and there always is an adaptation, whether it might be reasonably simple, might be reasonably easy, but there is an adaptation phase. And yeah, that's something to, because if people aren't warned about that, then like you said, someone can go full in, and then 3 months in they start getting all these issues, and they say, okay, I was wrong, and they go back to normal, back to square one. So it's important to make that. And for anyone who's interested and who doesn't know anything about oxalates, go and Google oxalates under a microscope. They are literally like needles, and that's what's inside your body. So there's no wonder that they're making all these issues. And obviously, I know you said before about you had joint pain and arthritis and things like that, which again, oxalates were probably the main cause of that as well. So once you once you started doing that, did you, were there any sort of more steps, or was that pretty much brought you to where you are now in terms of how you're eating?
Well, yeah, it's a great question, Ryan. Like I said to you, those first stages, I lowered my oxalates. Then I went for a sort of pescatarian style, low oxalate vegetable style diet. I could still remember buying things like bok choy and switching out my spinach to things like butter lettuce, because again, God bless their Sally. And then I was like, well, full carnivore seems to be. I dove into the carnivore space very deeply because I was like, I heard the success stories. People have heard me say I found Carnivore Cast and then Casey on Boundless, who's a dear friend of mine now. Both of them, Scott and Casey, on those, and I just went full bore into carnivore, and then I ran into the issues again, and so I am. Since then, I just really have stuck to the same diet. I do not deviate much at all. Um, these days, I added. People have to understand. How do I say this? Initially, as I mentioned, my body really struggled to add certain things back in. I incorporated dairy a lot early on because I wanted to put on weight. More recently, I have eliminated most of my dairy besides butter and ghee. And I have to thank Dr. Georgia Ede for that because her book, Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind, I read, and there's a specific chapter in the diet about dairy. I had always noticed. Now, let me start by saying this. Dairy served me well for a few years. It helped me to put on weight. It was an easy source of calcium, especially as I was going through the severe first couple of years of oxalate dumping. Think binding up those oxalates with the calcium source in the gut and especially in the stool. But I had noticed, if I had to be honest, that every time I had dairy, I would get brain fogged a little bit, not like in the past. Myself, let me just eliminate it. And the digestion wasn't the best on dairy. Let me just eliminate it and see how I feel. And I definitely notice an improvement now. As I mentioned, I eliminated because I was doing grass-fed yogurts. I was doing kefir in the mornings. I was doing all kinds of other things and drinking raw milk when I could. And so now there's no dairy except butter and ghee. And it's been very interesting because when you pare yourself down to this sort of diet, you really figure out what is a trigger for you if you ever end up having it again. Because immediately you're like, your body goes,
Yeah.
hey, what the heck is this? So now, just to let your listeners know sort of what I eat on a daily basis, it doesn't deviate much. There's a lot of red meat involved. I just love my red meat because it's so satiating and I really feel optimal on it. I do eat pork and chicken. I eat chicken most days, but so I start out in the morning. I usually about have 3 or 4 eggs. I like them sunny side up. I eat beef bacon. Yeah, I can't believe I found out that was a thing. I had never heard of it as a vegan until early. And then as carnivore, I was like, there's a thing called beef bacon. It's so good for those that haven't tried it. So I eat beef bacon with my eggs. And I eat 2 burger patties in the morning. More recently, I've added in a couple of hard-boiled eggs at lunch. I don't eat a full meal, and then dinner is kind of where I have my bigger meal. I have steaks and usually accompanied by chicken wings of some sort on the grill, and followed by that is my sort of I have some coconut yogurt now with bananas and blueberries right afterward for a little bit more of a carb source before bed, and also some higher to medium oxalate sourced foods that I can put in my digestive tract to slow the dumping process in the evenings. And it seems to be working very well for me. So my only non-animal foods I'm eating are now coconut yogurt because I switched from the dairy-based, and the bananas and blueberries, which I've kept pretty much almost throughout my journey for the last few years. And I have to tell you, I feel great. I feel absolutely awesome.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, dairy is an issue for a lot of people. I think I find in this space, I'm sure you found the same, it's quite divisive because there's people on the animal based side who are like, dairy is amazing, like raw milk will heal everything and all this stuff. But I find with a lot of people, dairy is an issue. And even for people who maybe can manage okay with it, they often feel better taking it out. Like you said, it can have its use, and dairy's delicious. It's nice to have. Let's be honest. But same as you, I do feel a bit better when I don't have the dairy in. And I think for a lot of people, because they think, oh, animal based, dairy's animal based, they think they should have as much of it as they want. Just have all the dairy, it's fine. And it can bring out some issues. It's not quite as pure as meat in terms of a source for us. And if we're trying to be ancestral, which is what kind of this diet is, we wouldn't have been eating a ton of dairy. I mean, until agriculture, sort of came in and farming began, we weren't getting milk from any sources other than, babies from their mothers. So, I think meat is definitely the key to it. And, if people are fine on dairy, like we said earlier, if you're fine on dairy, great. But if you're still having some struggles, maybe you should get rid of it. Um, and so I just wanted to also, you listed these health conditions that you were struggling with your health. There was even more that you didn't even list. Have you managed to resolve all of these now? Did they take a long time to resolve? Are you still dealing with some? How's your health looking now?
Sure, Ryan, just about to answer that, but just to go back to the dairy point very quickly, one of the things that I also noticed besides the brain fog, which a lot of people notice with dairy, is I got a lot of skin acne.
Mm.
I had a lot of breakouts when I got back into the animal-based dairy, and when I eliminated that, I had sort of acne on my legs and on my back, which I was like, what the heck, where is this coming from? Eliminated that, and it disappeared. Also, I found through speaking to a lot of people that deal specifically with Hashimoto's thyroiditis that elimination of dairy can be a big assistance with Hashimoto. So please consider all of these things. Often tell people try something for 30 or 60 days. See how you feel. There's no rule here. You can always add it back if you miss it that much. But it was very beneficial for me, as I say, to put on weight because that's what it's meant to
Yeah.
do in the animal kingdom is help baby cows really grow quite quickly. So yeah, to get back to your other question, man, when I start to list off all the things that I had, I know I'm missing a ton because there was a ton. I didn't get into the dental side. My gums were constant, the brain fog, skin cracking, nails splitting, severe malnourished state. I couldn't put on any weight, bleeding from my bowels, autoimmune issues, fatigued. My thyroid was swinging. We tested it. It was in the hypo state, then went to hyper at one point. Constant pain, fibromyalgia, arthritic-like symptoms, wearing braces on my wrist. All those things are gone. Gone. And I thought on my walk today, Ryan, that I often say when I'm on my walk, I remember trying to get outside and going where I go on my weighted walk now. I've graduated from a 25-pound vest up to a 45-pound vest that I truck around with me in the hot Bermuda sun and uphills, downhills. I could barely walk to the bathroom. And now I'm out on these 5-mile hikes with 45 pounds on my back. And I think to myself, how lucky am I that I found a way out? And I'm very fortunate. And it is just amazing to me what the human body is capable of. We are so resilient as human beings when we give ourselves what your body is asking for. I mentioned it before, I'll say it again. Listen to the cues, do not ignore them. You heard me say a couple of times early on in my life that I ignored what my body was trying to tell me. I listened to it right away now. There was the other day, listen, I had a colleague at work that she was so proud that she had cooked some fried mushrooms and wanted everyone to try that. And I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna just try a little piece. I said, I'm not gonna eat much, but I'll try it for you. She's like, oh, I tried it. Can you try? Sure, I'll try a little piece. It was delicious. It was great. About an hour later, my body was telling me, no, no, sir, this is not what you need. And these are the cues that I shouldn't have listened to. I should have, excuse me, listened to back in the day. Um, we are very resilient creatures, and we're very intuitive creatures, and we just need to appreciate that and know that change is possible. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Absolutely. That's a great message to be getting out there. I think, I say the same thing to people that our body can heal most, if not everything, if we just get out of its way, give it the right tools it needs, and stop poisoning it. And like you said, we have to listen to our body. Listen to your body. Don't listen to people outside who are telling you, no, you have to do more of this, you have to do that. Listen to your body. If your body's screaming out for help, something's up, listen to it, and start to take action on it, I think is what we need to let people know, which, obviously eventually you did it, but I'm sure that, you would have saved yourself a world of pain if you'd managed to listen to that earlier.
Oh yeah, and Ryan, just for another piece of history, I remember 2019. So just before it was Christmas 2019. Um, my folks have a second home in Virginia in the United States, and I was very, very sick. Think about what I mentioned earlier. I was just about to go on disability from my job. My family was worried about me. I flew for Christmas to the United States just to try and find some peace and relaxation. And I remember I was so ill on the plane. My parents were coming to pick me up at the airport. I said, we need to go to the emergency. Um, I had an episode on the plane where I had gone to the bathroom. I'm sorry for being graphic, and just blood was pouring out of me. Now looking back, it was certainly a colitis of some sort. My GP at the time, I had switched to a different GP, said, "Yeah, we're pretty sure you've got colitis." I had gone away. I went into the emergency room in the United States. They were laying me out on the bed and saying, "We need to do a CT scan of your abdomen with contrast immediately." And I remember laying there thinking to myself, what is happening? Am I dying here?" They were looking for much more sinister things, Ryan, and you know where I'm going with this. Thank goodness, thank you, Lord, that there was not any, but still, they ended up finding through stool tests that I had severe bacterial infection, Shigella, which for those listeners that don't know is a tough bugger to get rid of. So they had wanted to do a colonoscopy but couldn't because it was so contagious. They, get on the equipment, so I couldn't do that then. I also found out that I had chronic Epstein-Barr virus. So my immune system was so shot, go figure, that the Epstein-Barr virus is just replicating in me nonstop. It's called chronic EBV. Um, Even that now, through testing the titers, which are the tests for the virus, is like I never had it before. Whereas that stage, it was so high, my doctor was like, holy, no wonder you're fatigued. That's a thing with Epstein-Barr is the fatigue. And you just look back at situations to where I am now, those moments, those little flashbacks, and I go, it really is truly amazing. And there's even more miraculous stories out there. Like I've, God bless her, on the X platform, Valerie Smith, who healed her lifelong mental illness. Brett Lloyd, who's known to both you and I, and then Robin Dobbins, who I've interviewed. It's the folks with the that have come back from the depths of despair and the darkness of mental issues through changing their diet that are just amazing to me. And I had anxiety and depression, but nowhere near to what they were suffering with. But it's a testament to what is possible when you simply change what's putting in your mouth. And again, I'm not telling everyone this is the miracle and the panacea for everything. However, it can't hurt if you have been doing something for so long and never tried something for 90 days. Just give it a try. That's all I say. Just give it a try. You never know.
Exactly. And you led perfectly on to where I was going to go next, which is that, your story as well as all these other stories just shows the power of what we're putting into our body. Like you said, with what you put in your mouth, all of these, you're listing off all of those conditions that you had and you would have been diagnosed with. But it was down to what you were eating. And once you changed what you ate, they went away. And too many people are thinking that, oh, I've just got this condition, like it's just come from somewhere, I've caught it, or it's genetic, or it's this or that. But, we've got to look at what we're putting into our body, because if these people, like yourself and all these other stories, the same thing is happening. They're changing what they're eating, changing what they put in their body, and they're healing from these conditions. So that in itself just tells us that it's what we're doing to our own body. And if people can just kind of look at it from that new perspective and that mindset and see that, then they can start taking the first steps to fix it. And like you said, whatever they find that fixes it, it doesn't have to be exactly what we do or what we say, but if they can start looking for what heals them, it's possible. And it just shows that it is, as you said, it's the food you're putting in your mouth.
Yeah, and I will say, Ryan, as an adjunct and caveat to what I just said, please, listeners, go look up Sally Norton. Go look up Monique Attinger, who's also on X and on YouTube as an oxalate expert, and understand that this is not an overnight process.
Yeah.
This gradual clearing of oxalates from the body, and I tell people often, I always know when an oxalate dump is coming on. There are ways I've learned now you can slow that process and ease the pain that you go through. Thank you, Sally. Thank you, Monique. But Sally's been at it for about 9 or 10 years now, and it's in these last couple of years that she's really found the most relief. But so I do experience that. A telltale sign is I used to get this crazy shoulder pain come on, then lower back pain, knowing that it was coming out through the kidneys, and then your urine goes cloudy, or my stool would change; it would become more loose. That's another sign that your body is clearing oxalate. And then it just all of a sudden stops and disappears. This pain, which was almost no acupuncture couldn't touch it, chiropractic couldn't touch it, but then it would just disappear, and then it would come back. And I say that all to say that is it's going to be a process, especially for someone that is an ex-vegan. If you had a different diet prior to going mostly carnivore, it may be easier for you, but especially for vegans with high oxalate foods, it can be challenging. But comparatively, you've heard where I was before to where I am now. Oh man, I feel about 20, 25 years younger. In fact, I feel better than I did when I was 30 or 28 or 25. I'm more active. My mind feels sharp and clear. I'm just thrilled with how I am now for sure.
Awesome. Just jumping back to the oxalates as well, just for someone who maybe has come from a vegan lifestyle or a high oxalate lifestyle, what were some of the first kind of physical signs you got of the oxalate dumping? Other than obviously, I know you said about you can kind of feel it coming now, but when you weren't maybe having oxalates in your diet and it was just dumping and you were feeling terrible again, what were the symptoms you were getting?
Yeah, it's definitely, it was almost as if I was taking a step back to think of that body pain coming back, that fibromyalgia type symptom. My wrist started to ache again. So as I mentioned, oxalate loves to go to old injury spots in the body. When I was in boarding school and early university days, I separated this left shoulder twice, and I just started to get an achiness there. And then, as I mentioned to you, that rhomboid shoulder area would just start to ache to where I couldn't sleep at night. I would get sort of lower back pain, headaches coming on. So those are the type of things that you look for. And I was like, oh man, I need to get a massage or get chiropractic. And I was getting it quite early on, a lot of chiropractic. Again, thank you, Sally, saying that early on, if you're getting severe dumping coming from a high oxalate background diet, she said, really make sure you don't do a lot of chiropractic, because actually that can cause, if you manipulate the fascia on your body, more oxalates to dump. So yes, you can include it, but don't do it like I was doing it every week almost to get relief, because it could actually exacerbate the problem. So there's a whole lot of nuance. And for the listeners, listen to Ryan's podcast where he may have interviewed folks, but I have a series on my channel where I've interviewed Monique and an episode with Sally that we really get into the depth about dumping and what to do to sort of augment the process.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. People should, if they, if they feel that they're someone that's relevant to, they definitely should look into it because it is a thing, and I've seen lots of people who are struggling with it, and it's good to know what you're dealing with and to know how to deal with it as well. So, one more thing I wanted to ask you about, because obviously, you mentioned before about the supplements and taking your B12, and to me that's an instant sign that this can't be our complete human diet because the fact that you need to supplement. But obviously, we know the vegan diet is deficient in a lot of things. Run us through, what were you having to supplement? Was it just B12, or did you supplement other things as well? And what is it that the vegan diet is deficient in?
Oh yeah, I mean, let's just run down the things like DHA, EPA, B12 for sure, and then you talk about the essential amino acids: carnitine, anserine, taurine, creatine. Uh, there is a whole host of things that can only be found in animal foods. So immediately adding that back with the healthy animal fats, your body will nutrition that you need, as opposed to now, for your listeners who've made it thus far in the podcast, thank you for continuing to stick with me on Ryan's show. You think about the anti-nutrients that are wrapped up in plant foods, and we only talked about oxalates. There's others. There's lectins, phytates, you name them, and these all bind to minerals and just make absorption of other things that you're trying to get out of, if you're omnivorous, your other foods, more challenging for your body. So as you eliminate a lot of those things that have toxicities in them and just have the nutrition, your body begins to readily absorb them. So I just can't even tell you how much better my digestion is now since just mostly eliminating all the plant foods. It's like people, one of the things as well, don't you need fiber to
Yeah.
poop? No, this is the most regular. Ryan, I was consuming enough fiber that would choke a friggin' horse, and I was constipated. I don't mind sharing this so badly. Since I've switched and my digestion, the inflammation has gone down in my body. I'm regular as clockwork, perfectly formed stools. Again, I hate to get in this, but this is again some of the misinformation out there. Like fiber is a myth.
Yep.
It's like it's crazy. Um, so yeah, to answer your question, those are the type of things that I was missing. I was supplementing with all vegan-based, plant-based supplements, which were, I don't know if they were doing all that much, but certainly I know now I don't need to supplement again, save for my betaine HCl and lipase because of the lowering of those things in my body from that way of eating. Um, and yeah, and I could tell the difference right away. That incessant tinnitus, the ringing in the ears that I have, went down significantly. It's a little bit there still. I can notice it on certain days, but mostly that's gone. I mean, you have to imagine it was like so loud I could hardly sleep at night, that ringing in my ears. Um, the brain fog was the big thing. When my brain started to get the nutrition, my brain was like switched on again. As you hear most people that start eating animal foods again, I really felt like I was getting sort of dementia. I couldn't remember things. I was often being made fun of by my family members early on that I should have noticed. They're like, "You all right? You just put your keys are right there beside you." And I'm like, "Oh, crap." But yeah, huge differences now, huge.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we look at the when you look at macronutrients, fat and protein is what's essential to us. They're the only two that are essential. And, to get the proper fats and the protein that we need, they're only in animal products. That's where we need to get them. You brought up the point about bioavailability, which is something I always try and get across to people. Even when you look at your vegetables and you say, oh, well, it's got this, and then your body's not absorbing the majority of that. They're coming in plant forms, they're not in human forms. They've if they even get absorbed, they're then got to be changed into the usable form for us, which is a very poor conversion rate, and you end up with hardly anything. So we have to think about the bioavailability too, definitely of it.
Well, yeah, that's just it. You're absolutely right, Ryan. And so, things like the vitamin A sources, plant versus animal foods, and beta carotene and all that fun stuff. But um, just going back to what I was saying, it's the way that animal protein is in combination perfectly with the essential amino acids that allows us to just digest it and utilize it so much more easier. We've harped on this a lot in this episode, or certainly I have, that the way this nutrition is delivered to us and how we are able to absorb. People often talk about, oh well, we were meant to eat plants, and
Mhm.
if you look at our digestive tract. No, if you look at how everything was created, as Dr. Chaffee will talk about, in this perfect harmony from how if we're meant to have that high stomach acidity, that's for digesting protein. Then in combination with our gallbladder, if it's functioning properly, with the bile to then take all those nutrients out and get it into your bloodstream, and then the size of our intestines, our small intestine, yeah, when you start really getting into this, and I'll finish on this note, Ryan, for this particular part, is that there are a couple of pieces. We talked about that three-legged stool, that, when you look into it. And I encourage folks to go out there, listen to, especially Dr. Chaffee, obviously Dr. Sean Baker, look into the science behind it. I interviewed Nina Teicholz. The Big Fat Surprise is her book. Go read that book, The Big Fat Surprise, and how we've sort of been hoodwinked on how animal fats are detrimental to our health, when in fact they're one of the most healthy things we can be eating. And they've substituted with seed oils, which has made our current generations sick and worse off than we've ever been in our history. I mentioned Leah Keith in her book, The Vegetarian Myth. If you want to read a book, and if you are vegan or coming over to adding animal foods back in your diet, just read that book. Leah did such a great job from the moral standpoint to the political standpoint to the ethical standpoint to the nutritional standpoint on why it's a fallacy. It's unbelievable. And boy, she got a lot of hate from that. I tell you, she's been actually physically attacked, which is unbelievable when she's given presentations. But the more you start to learn, and then you talk about regenerative agriculture and how monocropping is destroying future generations' ability to be able to produce food. I had Will Harris from White Oak Pastures on his new book, A Bold Return to Giving a Damn. Read that and about how important the cycle of life is. For something else to live, something has to die. And as long as we understand that, and if you think as a vegan that nothing died to get your food on your plate, you're sorely mistaken. I know it's all about doing less harm, but come on, guys. Really get and look down into the details of this. It's noble. I get it. It's very, very noble. But if you look how the earth was created, how ruminant animals are necessary to build topsoil, how our ancestral past went, how we developed as humans, and we think about the nutrition, how our brains grew, how we evolved to where we are now. No one is advocating for the factory farming method and where animals are mistreated. No one, Ryan, not not yourself, not myself, not the air, not anybody. However, to have animal foods as part of our diet is so important on our futures. And everything out there now, from big pharma, big ag, to this misrepresentation of how it's impacting the environment. Meanwhile, people are flying around in their private jets using fossil fuels. It absolutely blows my mind. But start with those books I mentioned. Dr. Sean Baker has a fabulous book, which I often send to people, the Carnivore Diet, simply called The Carnivore Diet. That is a great intro into all this stuff that I've just been talking about. But just learn, listen to Ryan's podcast, the Health Well podcast. I've got my own, which we'll talk about in a second. But the information is out there. You just need to sift through it and see what resonates with you and then make the changes that you feel is appropriate for you.
Yeah, I think you've summed it up perfectly. As we said, the vegan argument is made very well and it's presented very well, but the science and the evidence is there to show that that's not the way it should be. And so if you look into it, it is there. And theirs is actually just built on the propaganda and not an actual science. But listen, I've taken up a lot of your time. Thank you so much for coming on. As you said, before you go, let us all know where we can find you in general, where we can find your podcast.
Ryan, it's been an absolute honor, man. I'm so glad we were able to do this. We had been talking about it for some time on X, but this is great. I'll have to get you on my podcast as well. Tell your story and how you got to where you are. So yeah, as I mentioned, one of the starting a podcast to help others share their story and to share mine. I've been featured on, had the privilege of being featured on a lot of podcasts, including yours, Ryan. But for me, it's at _carnivorist with a T on most of the socials. Carnivorist with a T chats, Carnivorist chats on all your favorite places you can find podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. I have a YouTube channel at The Carnivorist as well, where you can see all those episodes live up there. But thanks again. It was really an honor to chat with you.
Thank you so much. We will get or I'll put all the links in the description so people can easily find you for that. Thanks again for coming on, and we'll see everyone else again next week. And let's get optimal together.